Again, in this case, we see 4 strike prices, and we're going to talk about why there are 3 strike prices for each month. So on the terminology front, there's a neat little word in the options market that unfortunately doesn't show up in the English dictionary at all, and that word is moneyness. Now, options are classified in one of 3 ways. There's in the money, there's out of the money, and there's at the money. Now, we'll go into more detail about how these different classifications of options work, what makes an in-the-money option different than an out-of-the-money option, and what makes both of those different from the at-the-money option. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you've got to understand that when we're talking about in the money, out of the money, or at the money, what we're talking about is the option's moneyness. So if you happen to hear the term moneyness, and you'll hardly ever hear it, you'll hear it when Ron talks, right away in your head you should be thinking, hey, they're talking about whether this is an in-the-money, at-the-money, or an out-of-the-money option. All the exchanges will always try to maintain at least 3 strike prices. They'll try to maintain at least 1 strike price of each of these. They'll always have an at-the-money, they'll always have an in-the-money, and they'll always have an out-of-the-money option at the least. Normally, they're going to have more than this, but this is an at the least, almost guarantee. The reason that I say almost guarantee instead of just guarantee is because, of course, a stock can explode to the upside in an area that they don't have at-the-money options yet. The next day, you'll see those options created. So that's what I was talking about when I said there's always 3 strike prices available. There's an at-the-money, in-the-money, and an out-of-the-money. We're about to talk about that and what it all means and everything like that, but first, just one more important term. Another term that you might hear is American versus European. American-style options versus European-style options. Now, the American-style option doesn't just eat pizza and hot dogs. There's a reason it's called American-style. And it describes how and when these options can be exercised. So just remember, as an owner of an option contract, you get to decide whether or not you want that contract fulfilled. With an American-style option, which all equity options in the U.S. are, as opposed to index options, which are often European-style, all equity options in the U.S. can be exercised by their owner at any point in time between now and the expiration of that option. American-style doesn't have to wait till expiration. However, European-style options can only be exercised at expiration. That's going to affect the price of the option. So if you were trading stock options in the U.S., all those stock options are American-style, meaning you can exercise your right to buy or sell the stock whenever you want at any time between now and expiration. Again, all equity options, meaning all stock options, are American-style. Many index options, but not all index options, are European-style. For example, the symbol is OSX, you might be familiar with. They refer to the Philadelphia Oil Service Index. That tracks the performance of a whole group of stocks. The options on the OSX are index options. All stock options are American-style, but some index options are European-style. Now, when it's a European-style option, as some index options are, you need to know that you don't have the right to exercise that option whenever you want, only at expiration. So if you decide to trade options on an index, make sure you look into it. Look to see if your index is American-style or European-style. It's going to make a very big difference in the way that the options trade. Now, I've mentioned the exercise price, also known as the strike price, and every option has an exercise or strike price. What that is, it's just the price at which the option will be exercised for stock. We'll review more in the puts and calls section a little bit later, but the owner of a call option has the right to buy a stock at a strike price, and the owner of a put option has the right to sell a stock at a certain price, and that's the strike price. So I'll use call options in this example. Let's click to the next example. If I had, let's just say, the June 45 calls, or any month, if I own the 45 strike, or said differently, if I own the call option that has a strike price of 45 or an exercise price of 45, then I'm going to be able to buy the stock at 45 if I choose to do so. If I own the 50 strike calls, I'm going to have the right to buy the stock at 50. But on the other side here, on the put options, they give us the right to sell the stock at a strike price. So if I own the 60 put options, I'm going to have the right to sell stock at 60. So when you see strike price, that is the price of the stock at which the deal will go down. Remember, it's standardized. I get to select which price I want based on what's offered to me. So the strike prices are all standardized by the OCC, and you might hear exercise price used in place of strike price. They're the same thing. There's no difference. Now, we ask, why is it called a strike price? Because back in the day, when all these things were done verbally, it was said, if I'm buying the 45 strike, like this one or this one, that is the price of the stock at which our deal in the future will be struck at. You've heard the term, let's strike a deal, right? The deal is struck at the strike price. When we're talking about call options, if I own the call option with a 45 strike, then sometime in the future I have the right to buy a 45, and you, the seller of the call option, are guaranteeing that you'll sell it to me at 45. 45, that's the strike price that you're looking at here. That's the deal. That's the deal that was struck between you and me, and that's why it's called the strike price. All right. Terminology again. You're going to hear a couple of words. Exercise and assign. Now, when you're long an option, in other words, when you own an option, you're going to find out that you have rights. You have rights. You don't have any obligation as the owner of an option, the person who's long the option. When you own an option, you can exercise it. When you want the contract fulfilled, you, the owner, will exercise your rights. You'll exercise the option. So in the other example that we just discussed, the 45 strike price, if I decide that, I own this option, it gives me the right to buy the stock at 45, anytime between now and expiration date, as long as it's American style, I know that I'm going to be able to buy the stock at 45. If I use that option contract, I exercise my right, I buy the stock at 45, no matter where it's actually trading in the open market, it could be trading at another price. I exercise my right to buy it at 45, stock ends up in my account. Hopefully it's up. Now, if you're the seller of an option, or said differently, if you've written the option contract, then you're going to find out in a little while that you have obligations. You don't have any rights if you're the seller of the contract. You only have obligations. You're making a promise. Your obligation is to fulfill the contract as the buyer or the owner of the option sees fit. So being that I don't have the right to exercise as a seller of an option, I get assigned. When the buyer exercises his rights, the seller is assigned her obligations. So buyers exercise and sellers are assigned. So let's talk about the word assigned for just a second here. Now, assigned, you have an assignment. You made a promise. You're assigned something. If I sold an option contract to somebody else who's the buyer, let's say I sold an option at the same time you bought the option contract, you have the right to exercise at any time. Now, I made the promise that I will sell someone a stock at $45 per share. Now, at any time between now and the expiration date, I might get a call or an email from my broker saying, hey, remember that option that you sold that you received money for? You've been assigned. Remember the promise you made that you would sell someone stock at 45? You've been assigned. You have to fulfill that obligation. You're assigned on your option, and what I have to then do is sell somebody's stock at 45, the price that I promised to sell it at, which is the strike price. Now, traditionally, what everyone in the world understands the concept of is being long something. When you're long a stock, it just means that you own a stock. When you're long something, it means that you bought it, you own it, and you hope that it goes up in value. Option contracts are contracts giving someone rights to do something. So when you own an options contract, it means that you own the right to do something. When you own an options contract, another way of saying that is you're long the options contract. Just like when you own stock, you're long the stock. So basically, when you're long a call, or said differently, when you own a call option, you have the right to buy the stock at the strike price. When you're long a put option, or said differently, when you own a put option, you have the right to sell the stock at the strike. So again, you're long the call, you have the right to buy. If you're long the put, you have the right to sell. If you own the put, you have the right to sell. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, if that was easy enough, then the next part should be easy enough too. Remember, in order for a trade to happen, you have to have two people. You've got to have a buyer and you've got to have a seller. It's possible to either buy something first and then sell it at a later date. Everybody knows that. But it's also possible to sell something first, even though you don't own it. You sell something first and you buy it back at a later date. Not everybody knows that. So that means that there are two situations where you'd buy and two situations where you'd sell. You can buy something because you think it's going to go up in value, so you buy it. Hopefully you'll sell it at a later date at a higher price. Or you can be the buyer of something that you already sold a little bit earlier, where you're basically buying something back that you sold. So you're closing the transaction with a sale. Most people can only really grasp the concept of opening a position as a buy and closing the position as a sale. But it can work on both ends. It works both ways. Now, if this concept is new to you, then, the concept of selling first and buying back second, then I'm really about to change your whole life. Thank goodness right now we're talking about options and not stock, because you might have a harder time understanding how you can sell something you don't already own. But with options, the concept is very simple to grasp. When you enter into a position with the sale of an option as opposed to entering it with a buy, when you enter with a sale of an option, what you're actually doing is creating an option within the standardized terms that are available, and you're selling the option that you just created. So just imagine that you write down an IOU on a piece of paper. It's a contract. You're promising to do something later. So you write down the promise and you sign it. Now, if your word's good, then you can sell that promise to somebody. It has value. So back to the terminology. Now, we said earlier that when we buy something, when we own something, like a stock or an options contract, we said that we're long the stock or we're long the option. When we own an option, we own the right. We own the right to exercise the option. We can exercise our right. But when you open a transaction with a sell order, the terminology is you're short, or you have shorted something. You're now short the stock, or you're short, in this case, the options contract. So now we have that terminology out of the way. Now remember, we just said that when we are the buyer or the owner of the option, we can exercise that right. But when we're short the option because we open the position by selling the option, that means that we can be assigned on the option. That means that we can be forced to do something. We can be forced by the buyer to do something. So if I write an IOU to somebody and I promise that person that at any point they can use the IOU and force me to do something for them, the minute they decide to actually use the IOU and force me to give them something, then I've been assigned. So we'll go over the mechanics soon, but just to get the terminology down here, when I'm short a call, that means that I can get assigned. If I get assigned, it means that I can be forced to sell the stock to someone. When I'm short a put option, that also means I can get assigned. I can get assigned on my short put. In that case, I'm going to be forced to buy the stock from somebody. Again, how it all works is going to be discussed. I'm just teaching you the terminology right now, all right? So now let's talk about the two types of options that we have, calls and puts. Right off the bat, it's very important that I put something into perspective here. When two things are identical in every single way except for one way, they're actually a lot more similar than they are opposites. And unfortunately, one of the problems that happens when people learn about calls and puts is they learn about it in such a way that makes the two seem to be the opposite. And many people are taught that if you have a call, the opposite of that is the put. That's the wrong way to think about it. Okay? Just remember, there are two kinds of options, calls and puts. One goes higher when the stock goes higher, one goes lower when the stock goes higher. Now, unfortunately, the one single difference that I just mentioned between the two alienates people's ability to understand that a call and a put are the same thing. They're actually the same thing. They're identical in every single way except for that one way. So that makes them a lot more the same than they are the opposite. And one of the problems that we always find that individual investors have is that they're much more comfortable using call options because they're much more comfortable being bullish. Now, calls give you the right to buy. That benefits in a bullish market, prices going up. Well, as I've said throughout my career in trading and investing education, And as you may have heard me constantly say in the technical analysis course, Internal Strength System, you have to stay out of the habit of mainly being bullish. People have a very difficult time thinking in terms of bearishness, profiting from stocks going lower. And therefore, when most people learn about trading options, they start out by learning about being the owner of a call option, which is a bullish strategy. But it's just as easy to make money because something declined as it is to make money because something advanced. So you want to make money because you were right about the direction of something going up or down, not just when something goes up. So don't buy into the notion that over the long term, things just always go higher. We had a big economic boom that lasted about 30 years that was largely based on business growth because of the easing of leverage, the ability to borrow money, newly created ways to borrow money. And because of that, this was a trend that began in 1981, ended in 2008, and that's what pushed the market and the economy higher for so long. But after the 2008 crash, due to the credit crisis, it's quite possible that we don't grow as easily because money is not going to be as available to people. People aren't going to be able to borrow as easily as they used to. Look, anything can happen, okay? I know I'm not a fortune teller, but consider this. In 2009, the stock market was in the same place that it was 13 years prior to that. In that same time frame, we saw two big bull markets, two long gradual advances. But that's not always the case. In 1965, the Dow was at 874. 16 years later, in December of 1981, the Dow was at 875. That's 16 years. That's a long time to wait for a point. The market had huge gains and huge drops. It's like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. You could have made 10 to 20 times your money in this market, or you could have just held on for that one point. Okay, so don't be afraid to profit from both advances and declines. Just some side advice, and back to the options beginner class here. Now, people are more used to the concept of making money when something goes up, so they have an easier time understanding the call options, which move up when the underlying stock or ETF moves up. They have a much harder time digesting the concept of a put option, which usually moves higher as the underlying stock or ETF moves lower. But the truth is that if you understand calls and puts are the same thing, just used in different directions, you're going to very quickly become much more comfortable in using puts and making money from things tanking. The reason is that if you understand the mechanism between the two is identical, how they're priced, it's identical, you're going to understand how a call works, and it's going to help you understand how a put works. So whenever we train brand new traders, we always tell them first thing that they need to know is that a call is a put and a put is a call. You might not fully understand that right now, might not make much sense, but down the line, when we talk about the topic called synthetics, it's going to make a lot more sense. But the fact of the matter is that starting off learning about calls and puts, it's best to have it in your mind that these two things are very much more similar than they are different. The way a call works within the market going up is identical to the way that a put works in the market going down. So you'll find that the mechanisms are identical, just you want to own one when the market's going up, you want to own the other when the market's going down. That's it. So try to think about it in those terms when we start getting into describing and discussing puts and calls. So we have two types of these options. We have the call and we have the put. Call option gives the buyer the right but not the obligation to purchase a specific security at a specific price by a certain time, the expiration date. The put option, which works just like the call option mechanically, gives the buyer the right but not the obligation to sell a security at a specific time for a specific price. Now, these two options work identically the same. One bullish, the call, giving you the right to buy something in the future, and hopefully at a lower price than where it's trading. The other is a put, giving you the right to sell something in the future, hopefully at a higher price than where it's trading. Now, the thing that you have to understand, and you're going to see right off the bat how calls and puts are very much similar, or more similar than they are different, is just take a look at the risk and reward associated with the buyers and sellers of calls and buyers and sellers of puts. They're just about the same. First, let's talk about the call option buyers. Call option buyers have the right but not the obligation to buy stock at a fixed price, the strike price, over a given period of time before expiration. That means that because the buyer of a call has no obligation, the buyer of the call is the one who's in control. Now, they're the ones that decide what's going to happen. As a buyer of a call, the money that you spend is all you're ever going to risk, because if you decide to do nothing, then all you've lost is that money that you put forth in buying the call. Now, the seller of a call option, the person who's short the call option, has the obligation to sell the underlying stock to the owner of the call option if the owner of the call option deems it necessary at the set price that was already decided, that's the strike price, over a given period of time. The importance to understand here is that the buyers of the call option, who are long the call option, they have the right, but no obligation, to buy the stock, and the seller of the call option has the obligation to sell that stock when the buyer asks. So the buyer's in charge. Now, you have to understand that when you buy an option, you're considered longing. You're considered an owner of the option. You pay for that. Whenever you hear the term, it's a debit trade, that means that you're actually paying for something. It's a debit. Money's leaving your account, and the security's coming into your account. When you're selling an option, you're receiving the money. So that means that it's a credit trade. You're receiving money in your account. You're going to have an obligation. You're receiving money, so you have an obligation. You're taking on the obligation. For that, you receive payment. The person who buys the option is paying the seller. So the buyer is paying for the right to do something. So here's the visual for you. The seller, on the left here, is selling an option, now has the obligation to the buyer who's on the right. The seller got the cash from the buyer, and the buyer now has the right, which he purchased, to do something in the future. So if you have, let's just say, $10,000 in cash in your account, and you buy one option contract that costs $800, then you're going to end up with $9,200 cash and the call option with the starting value of $800 where you purchased it at. And the price of the option, or the value of the option, will begin to fluctuate. It'll move up and down. The cash will sit there, obviously. Now, as a buyer of the option, your account's debited the amount of money that you're spending, the $800. So in essence, the buyer of the option is buying the right to do something in the future. So remember, as a buyer, you're never obligated to do anything. As the buyer, you just have rights. Now let's talk about the seller of the option. The seller of the option contract, again, starts out with a $10,000 account, $10,000 in cash. But the seller of the contract, on the other hand, is actually someone who has no rights. See, they sold their rights. They were paid to give up their rights. That's why they only have an obligation. Their rights, they gave up to bring money into their account. Sellers are always functioning from a credit standpoint. They're credited money. They have money put in their account. They're the ones getting paid. So if you have $10,000 cash in your account and you sell an option for $800, you're going to end up with $10,800 cash in your account. You'll also have a short position in the option. Money's coming into the option seller's account. So when you look at a buyer is someone who's considered long the security. They pay for it. They're getting debited. A seller is going to be short the security, and they're considered short because they are credited. Money comes in for their sale. So what they sold is they just sold their rights. Now they're obligated. They're getting paid to give somebody else the right to do something. So let's talk about the generalized risks and rewards of calls. And what you're going to see in these generalized risks of call buyers and call sellers, they're identical to the generalized risk of put buyers and put sellers. Remember, we stated earlier, calls and puts are very much similar than they are different. We said the risks, rewards, the mechanism and how they work, it's identical. Now, a call buyer has what we call unlimited potential reward. On the bottom is the stock price. Stock goes up, it's going this way, goes down, it's going this way. So you can see here that when you buy a call option for $2, and that's all you can lose, but the higher that the stock goes, the more the price of the call increases. That never ends. The stock can go to infinity technically, so the price of the call technically can go right along with it. You have an unlimited potential gain as the call buyer, but you also have a limited risk when the stock moves lower. Why? Because you have the right, not the obligation. You never have to exercise your right to purchase the stock. So if you own the right to purchase the stock in the future and the stock traded down this direction, and it's trading at a lower price than where your right allows you to purchase, then you could decide to never exercise your rights. At that moment in time, what have you lost? Stock tanks, what's the maximum you can lose? Just the $2 that you invested into that call option. So the only amount that you pay, only the amount that you paid up front is the amount that you can lose. That's the amount that you paid for the call option, $2. So your risk is limited to $2. So if you decided, let's just say you're going in and you buy $5,000 worth of call options in GE, the most that you can possibly lose is $5,000. You can't lose any more. But again, you can make as much as the stock trades higher. Your loss is limited. And technically, since the stock can trade to infinity, your potential gain is going to be infinite. Now, the call seller sits on the opposite side of that equation. Remember, call buyer is making money. That means the call seller is losing money and vice versa. So the call seller has an unlimited potential risk. Remember, as the call buyer, the call continues to appreciate in price as far as the stock does, and the stock has the ability to go to infinity. The call buyer can make that amount of money. The call seller will then lose that amount of money. Now, the call seller has an unlimited potential risk. The higher the stock goes, the higher the call price goes, and if you're short the call, your risk is then infinite. You only have a limited reward, so you can only make the amount of money that you were paid as the call seller. Remember, as the call seller, you make money when the call declines in value. Whenever you sell short something, you make money when it goes down in value. So it's going to be the opposite of the buyer who makes money when something goes up in value. So if you sell a call option for $2, the most you can make is that $2 that you brought in, because the call's value can only go down to 0. Can't go negative, right? So if you sold something at 2 that was worth 2 at the time, the lowest it can ever be worth is 0. So what's the most that you can make? Well, obviously, it's now worth 0. You sold it for 2. You can keep the $2. You can't make anything more than what you sold the call for, so you have limited potential reward, and like we said, you have unlimited risk. So what's your maximum gain? If you're the seller of the call, or the person who sold the call option to the buyer of the call option, what's your maximum gain? When the buyer paid $5,000 for the right, he paid $5,000 to the seller. So the $5,000 is the most that that seller stands to make or stands to keep. And it's the most that the seller is ever going to be able to realize from this trade. And they're taking on the risk, the unlimited risk. When you sell calls or when you sell any options, the reward is limited to the amount that you received when you sold the option. In this example, it happens to be $5,000. And that's the amount that you received for the call option. As the seller, you profit when the call declines. You lose when the call advances. In this case, when the stock advances, because stock advances means the call advances. But the risk is unlimited. So if you're paid $5,000 selling calls in GE, you can lose an unlimited amount of money as GE moves higher, which is illustrated by the arrow moving this way. That's because the person who you sold the call option to at the time, when they decide to force you to sell GE to him, you're going to have to come up with GE stock. So you're going to have to buy it at the market price, which is higher, and then sell it to the buyer of your call at that lower price. So basically, I'll just explain that a little bit further. Basically, if you have a buyer and a seller of an option that gives the buyer the right to buy GE, the seller is obligated to sell GE at a specific price. Now, if GE moves much higher, let's just say GE goes from $20 up to $50, well, what's going to happen is the owner of the call is going to come to the seller of the call and say, hey, remember you said you were going to sell me the stock at $20. Now, if I'm the person who sold that call, who obligated myself and sold those rights to this person, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to go out and deliver GE stock to this person at 20. If I don't already own GE stock and the stock's at 50, I'm going to be in trouble because I'm going to have to buy the stock at 50 and then sell it at 20 and take an immediate 30-point loss. So right off the bat, after looking at this, you might wonder, Chris, why on earth would anyone ever want to take that side of the trade? Why would I want to be a seller of an option? I mean, Don't you want an unlimited potential profit, unlimited reward? Wouldn't you rather have a limited risk? Don't forget, you have to add probability of occurrence into the mix. It's much more likely that you're going to make money off of this. You're going to win more on this trade than you are as the buyer of the call option. Most of the time, because the premium paid for by the buyer, kind of like insurance, health insurance specifically, what winds up happening is the sale is normally the right thing to do. Think of a life insurance company. You ever wonder how a life insurance company can stay in business? How can they insure my life for a couple $1,000,000 and only collect maybe $1,000 for the entire year for 20 years? Well, if you do the math, they're collecting a lot less than they're guaranteeing to pay out on me if I should pass. But if they do it over a huge generalized population, what happens? The premiums wind up outperforming the total payouts. So we find this to be true in the options market. Several studies done by independent trading firms have found that selling options like this is the right trade anywhere between 72 and 81% of the time, depending on the stock. That far exceeds your ability to make money owning call options. In most situations, I'm not going to say all situations here, but in most situations, you're going to find that, some of these little generalized rules that you're going to hear me say right now, they aren't true in every condition. Normally, with all other things being equal, if the stock would go up, the value of the call option should increase. That doesn't mean it's always going to happen. Reason being is because people coming over from the stock market, they're only used to dealing with one variable that moves the stock up or down. You see, stocks ultimately go up or down because of one basic principle, which is supply and demand. It's a simple one principle that moves the stock, supply and demand. It can change for multiple reasons, but ultimately, supply and demand is what controls where a stock is going to go, up or down. In the option market, there's more than one variable. Obviously, options are a derivative. Everybody just calm down, chill out, relax. Don't jump out of your seat. I said derivative. We know that derivative simply means the option prices are derived from the underlying securities price. We know that there are multiple variables in the options market that can move an options price. The movement of the stock is just one of those variables. Another is something that we're going to cover later called implied volatility, or just volatility. You have historic volatility and implied volatility. Then there's another variable called time. You might have heard of that one. Movement of time. Remember, options aren't like stocks in the sense that the options contract has an expiration date. You guys remember that term. That means that the contract doesn't last forever. At some point it expires, it runs out, you run out of time. So that means that at some point in time, the contract expires, so there are actually three factors that affect the option prices. There are three major factors. There are a couple other minor factors like dividends or interest rates. We're not even going to get into that right now. Right now, all I'm doing is saying let's hold those other two major factors, volatility and time, freeze those. Those are going to remain constant for now. And let's just look at what happens to the value of a call when the stock moves. Now, I want to be very specific about this because I don't want to get lumped into all those other guys out there that try to teach you options. They make generalized statements like I'm about to make, and you think that every time that you buy a call, you're guaranteed to make money if the stock goes up, because you're not. Not every call is built the same. There are other factors you need to learn about. You're going to learn all that. We're going to teach you that. But again, if we're going to hold the other variables constant, holding time and volatility constant, if the stock goes up, call prices should increase. I say should increase, not will increase, because we're going to show you the examples of when that doesn't happen. Now, I have a question before I move on. Anybody ever buy a call option? They think a stock is going to go higher, so they run out, they buy a call option. They were right about the stock rips higher, but then the call option actually goes lower? Well, I got another question for you. Did you ever see the stock work out, but it just didn't happen in time? It didn't happen as fast as you thought, so the call option went lower. You probably didn't understand there's more than one variable to the options price. You didn't understand about time and volatility, so whoever might have taught you options before us probably wrote the stock goes up, call prices will increase. That's wrong. So that's why we're here teaching you them instead of them. Stock goes up, call prices should increase. Why yours didn't is you might have bought what's known as an out-of-the-money option because it was cheap. The stock did go up, but it never went high enough to offset the two variables, volatility and time, which were playing against you. So there you go. If that ever happened to you, it's because you just bought the wrong option, and we're going to teach you how to buy the right ones. Now, what happens if stock prices go down? Call prices should decrease. Remember, calls are a bullish instrument. They're a bullish instrument. We want underlying values, whether it be a stock or an ETF or currency or commodities or anything. We want the underlying value to go up when we own the calls. If the stock goes up and we own a call, we're doing good. If stock prices go down and we own a call, we're probably doing bad. What about when a stock trades sideways? Well, the call's price should probably remain the same. Now, in reality, if the stock's not moving and it's just trading sideways, the truth is because you're approaching the expiration date, the call will lose some value. And it depends on the call that you own, that you're trading, whether that value will be lost fast or extremely slow. We're going to get to that soon. But in this example, for the sake of the mental building blocks, and for the sake of the lesson, we aren't considering the effects of time and volatility. So all things being equal, we're talking about the stock movement only. Call prices increase when stock goes up. Call prices decrease when the stock goes down. They'll normally remain the same if the stock stands still. And again, that's without the effects of time and volatility. So remember, in the real market, things aren't so clear-cut. There are a lot of other variables out there. We need to talk about them, and we're going to talk about them. Let's take a look at another chart here. Take a look at the right-hand side. You can see the dotted line extending to infinity. So what does that represent a call buyer's ability to do? To have an unlimited potential return. There it is on your chart, an unlimited potential return. Second thing that you notice on the left side of the chart, the unhappy side, is the loss side. The nice thing is that your loss is limited, right? So you see your P&L right here, that dotted red line, it flattens out, goes sideways to the left like a hockey stick here as the stock moves lower, which is in this direction. Remember, as a call buyer, you can only lose what you spend on purchasing the call. Why is that? Because you have the rights as a buyer. You don't have obligations. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to jump in and buy the stock at 40 when it's down at 10. You could say, forget it, I don't want to buy the stock. Things didn't work out like you thought, it's not a big deal. Only the money that you used to buy the option to begin with can be lost. No more than that. So how's that for risk management? It's time to talk about put options. We've been talking about call options for a while. Now let's talk about the other side of the trade, put options. Remember what we said. You're going to notice the mechanism, from a mechanism standpoint, that the buyer of a put and the buyer of a call are very much the same. They both have rights. They both have the same limited loss. And they almost have the same rewards. They're just going in different directions. So you think about the difference between puts and calls as a single highway with northbound and southbound lanes. Think about the I-95 that runs on the east coast of the United States, all the way up and down the east coast. It runs all the way up from New York, runs down through Philadelphia, through Washington, D.C., all the way down to Miami. Now, if you're in the northbound lanes or the southbound lanes, the road runs through the same places. All it does is it runs in different directions. That's the only difference. Just depends on what side of the road you're on. So mechanically, the road works the same way. Different lanes give you different directions. Now, if I'm in the southbound lane, I'm heading southbound. Everything I saw going northbound, I'm going to see again going southbound. It's the same thing. So same highway, same mechanism, two different lanes, two different directions. One's going up, one's going down. And that's the way it works with calls and puts. So put option buyers have the right, but not the obligation, to sell a stock at a fixed price over a given period of time. Again, they own the right, they purchased the right, they paid for the right. They don't have any obligations because they're the buyer of the put. Buyer of the put now owns the put. It's a debit trade. They paid money, and it's now a long position. The person who owns the put is long the put. But sellers are the ones that are stuck with the obligation. They received money. So a put seller is obligated to buy the stock at a fixed price over a given period of time. So remember, the seller got paid. That's the credit side of the trade, the sell side. They got paid to give up their rights. The buyer pays to have those rights. And remember, what a put option actually does, what it is, it's a contract giving the buyer or the owner the right to sell a stock at a strike price. And the person who sold the contract to him, that buyer, is obligated to buy that stock from the person who paid for the contract. So again, Right versus obligation is what we're dealing with here. Buyers versus sellers, rights versus obligations. Buyers have rights, sellers have obligations. When you buy an option, you're long the position. You've paid money for the rights. It's a debit trade. Now you have no obligation whatsoever. You only have rights. Now, one of the things that confuses so many individual investors is the fact that owning the put or being long the put gives you the right to sell something. But you bought a put. And since you bought the put, you're long the put, you own the put, and you own the right to sell something. You can sell the stock or the ETF or whatever at the strike price. So think about it in terms of a stock. You own a put. The put gives you the right to sell out of a stock. Or if you didn't already own the stock, it gives you the right to sell short a stock. When you buy a put option, you bought a contract that gives you the right to sell a stock at a certain price. Now remember what I said earlier. You can sell something first and buy it back later at a later date, hopefully at a lower price. Or you can sell something that you already own. So if you own a stock and you own a put option on that stock, it gives you the right to sell out of the stock at a specified price. But if you don't already own the stock, what would the put give you the right to do? Well, in that case, owning the put gives you the right to sell short the underlying instrument at the strike price, and hopefully the stock is much lower than the strike price. So you'd sell short the stock at a price of, say, 50, you'd buy the stock right back at 30, and you make 20 points. And people have trouble understanding. They say, wait a second, Chris, I own the put. Yes, you own the put. It allows you to sell short the stock. So I'm not saying you're short the put. What I am saying is that you have the right to sell short the underlying instrument, the stock or the ETF, etc. Well, we just covered a lot in terms of options basics, but we have a little bit more to cover. So pop in the next DVD and I'll see you there. Now, to sell short, again, it just means that you sell something first and you buy it back at a later date. It's that simple. Basically, you profit when the trading vehicle declines. Most of the time in beginner options education or options basics, the student is taught to think about put options as portfolio insurance. Like they're told to imagine that they own 100 shares of a stock trading at 50, and the stock or the company announces bad earnings, which causes the stock to trade down to 30 bucks. So that means that the value of the stock went from $5,000 down to $3,000. So that's a loss of $2,000. Then they're told to imagine they owned insurance on the stock. And that insurance allows them to sell the stock at 50 even though it was trading at $30 a share. Beginners are told that they only lose the money that they paid for the put option. And that's all true. So that's how beginners tend to think about it. They always learn about puts, imagining that they already own the stock, and since they had the put option, they were allowed to sell the stock at the predetermined price. In this example, it happens to be 50. The reason that they're taught that way is because the educator doesn't want to confuse the situation by talking about what it means to short a stock, or to sell short a stock position as opposed to being long a stock position, which just means owning the stock. The educator basically doesn't want to open a big can of worms, so to speak. But those students, what happens is they end up getting confused later. So let's just keep talking about this for a little while. Let's get the hang of it so we can get it out of the way and you can understand both sides of the trade. Of course, you can use a put option as insurance, like in this example. If you own 100 shares at 50, stock drops to 30, you own a put option with the 50 strike, then you have the right to sell your stock at 50, even though it's really trading at 30. So the only money that you lost in this situation is the money that you spent on the put option, aka your stock insurance. However, what if you did not own the stock? You can buy a put option without owning the underlying stock. So the put option might still represent the right to sell stock at 50. So then the student says, well, if I don't own the stock, why buy the put? When the put gives me the right to sell the stock, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to sell a stock that I don't even own at 50? Well, if the stock's at 30, it'd be great to have the right to sell it at 50. It's because short selling a stock at 50, when that stock drops to 30, is a situation that you make 20 points profit on. That's a good thing. So when you don't already own the stock and all you have in your account is the put option with the 50 strike price, the put option gives you the right to sell short the stock at 50. It'll look like in your account, it'll look like you have negative stock in your account. If you sell short at 50, stock goes to 30, you're up 20 points. So when you sell a stock You exit your long position. But if you entered a sell order to sell 100 shares of stock when you never even owned the stock, you end up short the stock. You end up with a negative 100 share stock position in your account. That's a short stock position. And from the looks of this chart, that's a really good thing. So let me just make this very simple for you, because I don't want you to get confused. I don't want you to get ahead of yourself here. If you don't understand the fact that you can sell short a stock, we can stick with the portfolio insurance example, and we can build off of that. In reality, if you bought 100 shares of stock at $50 and you bought a protective put for $200, then the entire position that you would pay is $5,200. The reality is that you can see the put option's value. It started out here as $200 and it turned into $2,000. Started out at 200 when the stock value was 5,000, but when the stock dropped down to 30, the reality is people usually don't actually exercise their put option to sell the stock at 50. So in reality, the put option advances, the put option increases in value while the stock decreases in value. So typically, the stock is sold for its value, and so is the put. So they might sell out of the stock $3,000 and sell the put $2,000, and you walk away with the same $5,000. Here, the stock value went from $5,000 to $3,000. The value of the put went from $200, where it started, up to $2,000. So you started out with $5,200. It's a $5,200 position, including the put option and the stock option. And as I said before, you usually wouldn't use the put to actually sell up here at 50. In reality, the put option goes up in value while the value of the stock declines. So typically, the stock is sold at that value, and so is the put at the higher value. You still walk away with $5,000, the same thing you would have walked away with in the other scenario. So just remember, you don't have to first own the stock and buy the put as insurance. You could do that, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to buy the put for the purpose of insurance. You can just buy the put for $200, and after the stock drops, you can sell out of that put option for $2,000. Your ownership of that put gives you the right to become short the underlying instrument. And if you become short the stock at 50 and your stock goes down to 30, then your position would be profitable by $2,000, and therefore your put option will trade in the options market to $2,000. Okay, let's study the risks and rewards of the put buyers and the put sellers for a minute here. Now, they have the same generalized limited risk and rewards as call buyers and sellers, except for one part. Now, we know that stocks can trade up to infinity, but stocks can only trade down to zero. So, as the owner of a put, the further the stock trades down, the more valuable your put option becomes, the more money that you're going to make, like in the last example. But in the last example, the stock dropped 20 points, so the put went to 20. However, if the stock traded from 50 down to 0, the highest that the put option can possibly trade to is 50, or the value of $5,000. So while the most that you can lose is the money that you put in, which was the $200, or $2 per option contract, which represents 100 shares, so it's a max loss of $200. The put buyer, just like the call buyer, has a limited risk, that $200. The put buyer can only lose the amount of money that they spent buying the put, and no more than that. So put buyer has unlimited potential reward, sort of, all the way down to 0, and limited risk, just like the call buyer has unlimited reward and limited risk. Put seller, just like the call seller, is on the other side of that equation. Put seller has unlimited potential risk. We say unlimited, but it's really unlimited just down to 0. We'll get to that in just a second. But as the stock trades down, that means that the put seller is unhappy. The put buyer is happy to see a stock trade down, but the put seller is unhappy when the stock trades down. Why is that? Because the put seller will continue to lose more and more and more money as the stock trades lower and lower and lower. When people sell short options, they collect what seems to be a small amount of money, just like that $200 that we collected if we were the seller of that put option. So often, they sell a lot of them. Often, they bite off way more than they can actually chew because they think that it's easy money. I told you, you make more money, you make money more often by being the seller of an option. Now, if you look at that, you only picked up $200. You might decide that's not enough, and by the way, this is easy money. So while the loss is limited to the stock trading to zero, the loss seems to be infinite, and it often is, because people sell more options than they can afford to be obligated to buy in terms of the stock. So ultimately, they have a fixed amount of loss because ultimately the stock can only trade down to zero. Ask anybody, though, who sold short put options on Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers or Enron. Once that hits zero, obviously the stock can't go any further. That means the value of your short put can't increase anymore. And since you shorted it, if it increases, that means you're losing money. So technically, the seller of a put does have limited potential loss, down to zero. Now, as the buyer, the nice thing about these options is that so many people nowadays are talking about risk management. They saw the stock market crash violently. Now they're talking about, how do I create a risk management system? Well, if I'm the buyer of an option, I have an automatic risk management plan in effect right away. So I already know that the exact amount of money that I can lose is the money I put into it. I can't lose any more than that. So if I control the amount of money that I use to buy the option, then what have I done? I've created a perfect risk management scenario by just simply only spending the amount of money that I'm willing to lose. So, what if the stock goes up? What happens to the value of my put? Again, we have to take everything else into consideration, but we have to understand that there are a lot of different factors, other variables, like we said. There are three factors, or three major factors to the value of an option. The underlying security that we're talking about here is only one of those factors. What's number two? Well, there are two others. There's volatility, either historic volatility or implied volatility, what people think might happen in the future to the stock, how volatile they think it's going to be. That influences the price of an option. Number three is time. So time is variable number three. So we know that volatility and time have a large effect on an option's price. We're going to talk about that coming up. But for right now, for this understanding, just like before with the call scenario, we want to understand how a put's value is going to move with movements in the underlying stock or ETF or what have you. So we're going to ignore time. We're going to ignore volatility. They're a major part of the market. You've got to understand that, but we'll talk about those variables a little bit later. Now, if the stock were to go up, the value of my put should go down. My right to sell at what is now going to be a lower price than where the stock is trading is not as valuable. Why would I want to sell something lower than where I can actually get fair value for it in the open market? For example, I don't want to confuse you here. If the last stock that we looked at went from 50 all the way up to 60 instead of down to 30, we would own a put option that gives us the right to sell the stock at 50. So why would we want to sell the stock at 50 when it's trading at 60? You could sell it at 60. If you own a stock and you want to sell it and you want to put that money in the bank, do you want to sell it at 50 or do you want to sell it at 60? Well, you want to sell it at 60, of course. So if you own the right to sell it at 50, meaning you own a put option with a 50 strike, it's basically going to be worthless if the stock is at 60. It's not worth anything to anyone. So when the price goes up, meaning the price of the stock or the ETF or whatever that put option is related to, when the price of that underlying security goes up, the value of my put goes down. However, when the stock price goes down, the value of my put increases. Basically has an inverse relationship. Why? Because remember, the put gives me the right to sell. So if the stock price is going down and I'm having the right to sell at a higher price, the lower the stock goes down, the bigger difference is between where I can sell via the rights that I have in my put purchase versus where the stock is actually trading right now. So stocks going down increases the value of puts. We just saw why that's true in the portfolio insurance example. If the stock goes sideways, the put prices should remain about the same. Now, in that condition, in the stock going sideways, you're going to see later on in our program that the reality is, as the stock trades sideways, we come closer to the expiration date. What happens in reality is the put option will start to lose value. It becomes less and less valuable as you have less and less time until expiration. Again, we're going to hold time, we're going to hold volatility constant, and we're just going to keep going with this. We're going to keep on going, and we're going to look at a chart of us owning a put. So let's say that we own, let's just see, we have the XYZ May 40 put. Okay? Here's a chart of us owning a put. Let's say we have XYZ May 40 put for $2. How much is the total amount of money at most that we can lose? We paid $2. How much can we lose? Max. You can only lose the amount of money that you spent, $2. So if I pay $2 for the put, most I can lose is $2. Remember, we talked about that being a great risk management tool. So if we only want to put up $2 for one contract, which is $200, the most we could possibly lose is $200. It's built into the options price automatically. Option buyers can never lose more than they spent, period. I want to control my risk, then I never spend more than I'm willing to lose. If I only spend what I'm willing to lose, I never lose more than what I was willing to, and that's the simple concept. So if I buy this option at 2, it's the most I can lose. If you look at the right-hand side of the chart, you can see that the $2 loss occurs right around 40 here, and you can see it extends no matter how much further the stock goes. So if I buy a put option and the stock trades to 50 or 60 or a million, I can only lose that $2. If you look at the left-hand side of the chart, where we have our area of profit, the further the stock goes down, the further the line moves to the left and up, which is profit. So when the stock moves down, which is in this direction from 40 to 30, you can see that our put becomes profitable. We have a break even here. We'll get to that in a minute. But as a put buyer, that means I'm going to be making money as the stock tanks, as it drops. After the stock gets beyond my break even, again, 38 right here. We'll talk about that when we get to the we get deeper in puts and calls. All right, so just a little recap here. Let's go to this next table. You see this table right here? Well, it shows you long and short, call and put. So let's match them up. If you're long the call, you have the right to buy. If you're long the put, you have the right to sell. When you're long, you have rights. In other words, when you own the option, when you're the buyer of the option, you're the one who has the rights. When you're short, you're getting paid. Money's coming in, you're getting a credit. You want to make sure that everybody knows that out there. When you're long, you're the one who's paying. You're buying the rights. When you're short, you're bringing the money in. When you're long, it's a debit trade. When you're short, it's a credit trade. It's a credit trade because money is coming in. All right, let's talk a little bit more about call options, and we'll get a better idea of how things work. Let's take a look at a little example here. Let's look at all the little pieces, the tidbits of terminology that's going to be in this little line that we have right here. Buy 20 SLB, May 40 calls for $3. Might be a little bit confusing when you first look at it. So let's just go word by word here. Let's look at the first word. Let's continue. Buy. Here you know if you're the buyer or the seller. That's pretty easy, right? You're buying 20 SLB May 40 calls. Apparently we're the buyer in this situation. Second thing that we run into is number 20. Now what does that mean? That means that we're buying 20 contracts. Remember, every contract is worth how many shares? Typically, 100 shares. Every contract is worth 100 shares of stock or 100 shares of the ETF. So, when the call option is at $3, what would 20 contracts be worth? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about this. If you need to get your 6-year-old, you can do that. Have them do the math real quick. Get a pencil with an eraser on the back of it. 20 times 100 is 2,000. So whenever we see 20 contracts, we know it's going to be worth 2,000 shares. 20 contracts means it represents 2,000 shares of stock. So that 20 right there is the amount of contracts. When you do the math with options, very easy. Just add 2 zeros to whatever the number of contracts is. So 20 contracts is 2,000 shares at $3, and that's $6,000. On to the stock symbol, SLB. SLB just happens to be the stock symbol there. It happens to be for Schlumberger. It's an oil company, oil service. And then we come into the next word, May. I think everybody knows what May is, but in case you're not familiar with the word, May is a month. It's the one that comes after April, and it's right there between April and June. So we know what May is. Hopefully everybody does. And when we're talking about May in this light, we're talking about the expiration month. Now, what day in May are options going to expire? Do we remember? In May, in every month, options expire on the 3rd Friday of the month. Technically, it's Saturday. Don't get confused. To you, it's Friday. To the OCC, it's Saturday. They expire on the third Friday of the month. Third Friday is the last chance you're going to have to trade the options by 4 o'clock. And Friday at 5:30 is the last chance you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to exercise them. Now, next number, 40. What's 40 mean? Well, 40 is the strike price, or the expiration price, May 40 calls. Okay, so let's do a quick review of where we are so far. So far, we know we're buying 20 Schlumberger May 40 calls. So what's 40 again? 40 is the strike price, or the price at which the deal will be struck at, or the exercise price for the May 40 calls. So if you're going to buy 20 Schlumberger May 40 calls, you're buying the right to buy 2,000 shares of Schlumberger at $40 per share sometime between now and the May expiration. Remember, this represents 2,000 shares. You're buying the right to buy 2,000 shares of a $40 stock. That's $80,000. You're buying it for $3. We said that's $6,000 you're putting up to control $80,000 worth of stock. So that's the kind of leverage that we're working with here. You have to make sure that you understand the math on this and how it works. All right, so I just want to stop here for a moment and talk about this, because this is probably one of the most, if not the most important parts of trading options that you're going to have to be thinking about, and that is using options for everything that I just taught you. You can use options to your advantage for safety, like limiting your risk, the built-in risk management system that we've been talking about. That only works if you use it the right way and you don't over-leverage yourself. So, if you have 100 shares of a stock and you only want to risk 2 points, well, you could just buy one option contract trading at 2. It's $200. But if you go out and you buy 15 option contracts with the same amount of money that you would have used to buy the stock, what's going to happen is you're going to control 1,500 shares of stock instead of the 100 shares that we were talking about. So every point that you lose on your stock, it's really like losing $15 per share. Let's take a quick look at this, okay? We're going to break this down once again, and we're going to make sure that you use options for safety, not so much for leverage. You can use a little bit of leverage. Let's not go crazy. Let's not bite off more than we can chew. Okay. Remember, we bought 20 Schlumberger May 40 calls for $3. Now, if we're buying 20 calls, that means that we're controlling 2,000 shares. If it's the May 40 calls, what we're saying is we can buy 2,000 shares of a stock at 40. That's $80,000. Now, maybe you're used to trading $80,000. Maybe you're used to trading more. But if you're used to trading $6,000 worth of stock, which is how much this trade would cost, then you should not trade $6,000 worth of this option, because you're over-leveraging yourself. You're controlling $80,000 worth of stock. Now, if you're talking about a $40 stock, you're buying the call for $3. It's a $6,000 trade. Let's talk about the math for a minute here. Now, it depends on which way your brain works. I'm going to tell you from my perspective, and as long as we're starting out in the basics here, you can think about it any way that you like that's most comfortable to do the quick math. What I like to do is just add 2 zeros to the contract. Every contract represents 100 shares. To me, math is easier that way. I'll take 2 zeros, and this will say 2,000 at $3 a share. Another way to do it is the reverse. You take 3 and multiply that by 100. So you've got each one of these contracts is going to cost $300 because it's at $3 per option contract. And then you multiply that by 20 contracts. So you have 20 contracts, multiply that by the $300, and you've got $6,000 is how much the entire trade costs. So if you're used to trading, say, $6,000 worth of stock, you don't want to go out there and buy enough options to control $80,000 worth of stock, because chances are, if you're wrong, you're not going to have the tolerance to accept that kind of a loss. Remember, you can lose everything that you put into the call option. If you're used to trading $6,000 worth of stock, you're not going to put $6,000 at risk in this call option. If you're wrong on a stock and the stock trades down by 10 points and you bought $6,000 worth of a $40 stock, you're going to lose $1,500 as opposed to the $6,000. And $6,000 is going to sound very tempting. If you're used to trading $6,000 worth of stock, it's going to be very tempting to put that much into the call option, because People, human beings by nature, are positive, and they always imagine the upside of things, and they think about that a lot harder than they think about the downside. So you're going to think about turning $6,000 into $30,000 very quickly. You're going to say, all I need to do is just do that one time, and then I'll start to tone it down and not use too much leverage. Don't do it, because it's the mistake that will wipe you out of the options market, and it'll make you tell all your friends that options are this high-risk game that you lost all your money in. Everything we learned up to this point shows you how you can use your own built-in risk management tool by buying put options or call options. So you see here, again, if you're used to putting $6,000 into a stock, you know this option can buy you stock at 40. That's 150 shares of stock. Use a little bit of leverage. Maybe you buy 2 call options. Maybe even you buy 3 call options. It's going to be a $900 trade. So think about that. Don't put the same amount of money that you'd put into a stock into an option. Don't do that. Maybe think about how many shares you would be able to buy at the strike price. Maybe think about how many option contracts that would represent, or how many option contracts you would need to represent that share amount. And then you buy a little bit more than that. Use a little bit of leverage. Let's have some fun. Losing the amount that you usually put into a stock is not very fun. All right. Let's talk about how these option contracts work. These call options right here. We're going to use an analogy, and we're going to put together, let's just say that we're looking at a house, like you see right here. And let's just say that we'd like to buy the house for, say, $1 million. So I'm figuring that after you make all the money that you're going to make in the options market, after we teach you the proper way to do it, you're going to start buying a whole bunch of houses. So let's just say we decide to buy a house, and it is selling for $1 million. Well, what's the first thing that we're going to do if we're going to buy a house? First thing we're going to do is we're going to put down a deposit. We leave a deposit on a house. So it's kind of like a call option. It holds that house for us at a certain price until we're ready to come back and actually do the purchase. So a call option is just like that money that you put down. In this case, let's say that, we put down $20,000. So it's kind of like when you fill out the contract to purchase the house, you put down the deposit, maybe you put down $20,000 in this case. The call is just like that deposit. You can, if you want to, go and buy the house on that future date, the closing date, for $1 million. So let's say that you're waiting for the closing. It's delayed a little while. And so in my analogy, it gives us a little bit more time here, so it works. And while you're waiting for the closing, all of a sudden, real estate prices drop dramatically. Imagine real estate prices dropping dramatically. I know it's very hard to think about. So let's say that your $20,000 deposit gave you the right to buy the house for $1 million. But the value of the house suddenly tanks, and it comes down to $800,000. All the houses that are similar around it are selling for $800,000. So you might go out and you might go shopping for another house. You might find something better and decide, you know what? That other house that I saw for $1 million, it's not worth it. I found a similar house for $800,000, and I think I'm going to buy that one instead. So if you think about it, you put down $20,000. What do you lose? You lose your deposit. That's it, no more. So you wouldn't lose a penny more than the deposit that you put down, because the deposit is basically you buying the right to purchase that house at $1 million in the future. That's kind of how the call option works. So with the house hunting scenario, you could just walk away from the deal. You could decide that you don't want to pay $1 million for the house that's valued at $800,000. In this case, you're better off just losing the $20,000 deposit that you had in the house, because while you might lose the $20,000 deposit, you're avoiding overpaying by $200,000. Just like with the call option, you can just walk away from the stock. You're not obligated to actually buy the stock. Here, you're not obligated to buy the house. So let's say you put down 2%, again, for it's $20,000. That $20,000 deposit is going to hold the house for you for the next, let's just say 60 days, or however long the contract's going to be. It's just like the amount of money that you spend on a call option, right? Well, just walk away. Call option can give you the option to buy, let's just say, a stock at $100 per share. But you only pay $2 for the call option. $2 per share for a call option is $200, as we discussed before. Now, let's just say the stock price goes down to $80 a share. Just like the house price dropped to $800,000. So instead of being down 20 bucks, where if you would have bought the stock at 100, you'd be down 20 right now, you're only going to lose the $2 on the call option. After the stock moves lower, You can either buy the stock at 80 as a totally different transaction, or you could just buy another call for $2, giving you the right to buy it at $80 if you choose. So, if you think about it, that $20,000 that you're putting down on the house is going to hold that fixed price. So that $1 million purchase price for the house is fixed. You basically own the right to buy the house at $1 million, just like a call option gives you the right to buy a stock at a certain price. It's the same exact idea. Call works the same exact way. So whatever money you put down on the house is kind of like the call's purchase price. It's what you would spend when you buy the call. Now, that's the absolute most that you can lose, just like the $20,000 is the absolute most that you can lose. And now you own the right to go ahead and either exercise your right, buy the house at $1 million, or not. So let's consider the other side of the coin. What happens if in the next 2 months housing prices start to soar? So think about it. Housing prices just take off. That house that you have a contract on, that you put down $20,000 to reserve that price to pay for the house for $1 million bucks. Now the house is worth $1.2 million. So we're going to time travel back to 2004, the good old days. Now, does the person who's selling you the house that you contracted with, do they get to move up the price? They say, well, look, real estate prices are skyrocketing and, I just forget about my contract. No, they don't get to do that. They're contracted to sell you that house at $1 million. By some dumb luck, let's just say you were right. You signed the contract for a house before the prices went up. So that's an excellent job that you did. Kudos to you. That contract states that you have the right to buy the house at $1 million. Doesn't matter what the house is now worth. It could be selling in the open market. The comparable houses can be selling for $2 million. This person still has to sell it to you for $1 million. So you get to buy it at $1 million. So if the stock appreciates $200,000 in the next few weeks, just like if the stock appreciates, or just like if the house appreciates $200,000 in the next few weeks, and you're now looking at the house worth $1.2 million, you still have the right to buy it at $1 million. So what happened? The value of your contract, this $20,000 contract, actually increased. You actually made money already without actually going and buying the house and selling it in the market. You're actually up because this value of this contract has got to be worth at least $200,000. So you can now decide if you want to exercise that right to buy the house at $1 million or not. So as the buyer, you can immediately go out there and sell the house for $1.2 million, pocket the cool $200,000, cool indeed, and now you're up. Now, you don't have to do that. Remember, it's your option to choose to exercise that right if you want. You bought the right. You can exercise it. You don't have to. So back to the analogy. And please remember, we time traveled back to 2004. We're home buyers, and we're literally at this point paying people to hold the price of a home. So don't start throwing soda cans at the screen here, please. It's just an analogy. I know I'm breaking hearts right now, but in the example, you have to go out and you have the right to buy that house for $1 million. Since it's now worth $1.2 million, it's year 2004, you might decide, you know what? I really don't want that house that much after all. So I'm going to turn around and I'm going to sell it out. So the going price is $1.2 million. You sell it out, or you could just sell out the contract. You could buy the house for $1 million, sell it for $1.2 million, or you could just sell the contract. So how are you going to sell the contract? Maybe you're not a real estate investor. You don't understand that you can just sell that contract. Well, obviously, you buy the house and then you go and you sell the house. But the neat thing about options, which people don't realize at first, I don't have to actually buy the house and then resell the house. I don't have to exercise my right. You see, the contract that I hold now has value. If you think about it, $200,000 in value at least. I don't have to go through all the lawyers and the closing and then do it all over again and sell the house. In fact, the contract I have might be very valuable to somebody else, because if they want to buy the house, they might know it's the year 2004, and by the time they get to all the paperwork in order and they have their attorneys and everything and the mortgage, the house might gain another $100,000 in value. Remember, houses were skyrocketing every single month. The contract, the right to buy that house worth $1.2 million, has a value. So I can go up to somebody and sell them my contract. I can let them pay $1 million for the house. I get my $200,000 for the value of the contract. So the sales price of the house I'm really getting is 1.2 million. My profit's 200,000 since I bought the house at $1 million. I sold it at 1.2. Instead of going through all the legal work to buy the house and then get, and sell it to somebody else and then go through that whole scenario, the whole settlement all over again, all I have to do is sell somebody my contract. And that's how it works in the options market. All the legal costs in the analogy that we just used can be compared to the commissions you pay when you buy and sell a stock and do the whole exercise and everything. The difference between the bid, ask, price, and everything. Consider that all the lawyer's fees in this analogy. So if you think about it, how much will I sell the contract for? $200,000. So in my analogy, let's just think about the other side of that for a second. Remember, if I bought a contract, if I bought a call option, or if I bought this contract for $20,000, there's a seller of the call option, or there's a seller of this $20,000 contract. Now remember, I can sell the contract that I bought for $20,000. I could sell that for $200,000. So that's when I become the seller of the contract. And then I'm out. And I don't have any obligation. I don't have any rights. I'm just out of the picture completely. But let's think about the person who originally sold this $20,000 contract to me. It's the owner of the house, the person who wrote the contract, the person who's selling the house. Now, they're still getting their $1 million. They're just not getting it from me. They're getting it from the other guy who I sold my contract out to. So I'm still, paying my $20,000. The seller of the house is still getting their $1 million. And the buyer of the house is still buying the house at $1.2 million. Remember, they paid $200,000 to me, then they're paying $1 million for the house. In total, they paid $1.2 million. The fact of the matter is, you won't have to go through the entire exercise process. The option itself, like the contract, now has value. The contract itself has this $200,000 value. I don't have to exercise my right to buy the house. I could just sell the contract to someone else because now the contract represents real value. So that's exactly the same thing that's happening with your option when your call increases in value. The value of the stock, which would be the house, has increased. My contract is allowing me to buy at the lower price. So I could exercise my contract, buy the stock at the lower price, then run out into the open market and sell the stock out there. Or I could just sell my call out because that call now has value, just like my house contract had value. So something you should know. Most option contracts never actually get exercised. So remember, if I create an option contract, I'm the seller of the contract. I've created the contract, sold it, somebody received some money. Hopefully what I'm going to do later on is buy that contract back. Contract no longer exists. So I'm selling someone rights, they bought rights, I have obligations. Later on, that's a wash when I buy back that contract. Somebody else who bought a contract eventually ends up selling their contract, and that's how it works. So most options don't go to exercise. Most of them are traded out prior to that. So you may have heard that rumor that went around for a long time that said 90% of all options expire worthless. That would be awesome because I'd be a seller and I'd be right 90% of the time. It's just a rumor, got way out of control. I can't tell you how many times I heard that one from people whose money I was managing. I introduced them to options and so on. Let's talk about how it really works. In 2008, only 19% of all options positions in a customer and firm account expired unexercised. That means somebody bought an option and just let it go to expiration and the option's worth zero. Most of them got closed out. In fact, almost 70%, 69.4% of all options were closed out. And that means that instead of exercising the option that a person bought was just sold at another price. Or the option that somebody sold was just bought at another price. Only 11.6% of options were actually exercised. People don't usually exercise options, do the whole thing where you buy the house and sell it in 1.2. People don't really do that. 19% of all options positions expired unexercised, like I said. So again, almost 70% of all options positions were closed out through sales. So we're going to get into how that actually, how to actually open an options position and how to close an options position soon. But just know that you can either buy first and sell second, or you can sell an option first, also known as writing or shorting the option contract, and then you can buy it second. So again, this is one thing that you have to understand. A lot of beginners get confused about this. In fact, a few people, like I said, they've told me that they're convinced that 90% of all the options expire worthless. 100% false. 70% of option contracts are just sold, exited, that's it. So you buy an option at 5, hopefully you sell it at 8. Or you buy it at 5 and maybe you sell it at 3 and you lose money. Or you're the seller of an option, you might sell the option at 5 and the option drops to 1, you buy it back, and then you profited $4. So when you hear that silly rumor about 90% of the times they go down or they expire worthless, just know it's not true. If it was, like I said, it would be great. It'd be awesome because I would sell an option at one price and buy it back cheaper 90% of the time. Remember, there's two sides to every trade. So you can take either side of the trade. You can profit from it. If you're right about something going lower, then you can profit from it just as easily as, and oftentimes even more easily than, you can profit from it going higher. Now, I'll get back to the terminology in a second, but just sticking with this, let's continue with the house analogy. Now, obviously, that contract had real innate value, didn't it? Think about it. We said it 100 times. When I purchased that house contract, put $20,000 down, right? So if I decided to buy that house, or if I decided not to buy that house, then I could lose the $20,000. And that's basically the call price. The down payment I put on my contract for the house is basically the call price. That's all I can lose, right? I own it, and that's it. That's the maximum downside risk. Once the house appreciates in value, like the stock appreciates in value, the call itself starts to acquire an innate value, just like in the house example. Remember, the contract that I bought on the house was worth $1 million. What's the innate value of the contract when the house was worth $1 million? There is no innate value, no intrinsic value. When the house was still worth $1 million, the contract really had no innate value. It's nothing. I'm buying something at its fair value. So basically, I could have bought the guarantee for $20,000 and then bought the house for $1 million. So my contract says I can buy the house at $1 million. How much is the stock? How much is the house worth? It's worth $1 million. There's no innate value to that contract. However, if the house increased in value, the contract starts to gather innate value. So if you remember, we said that the house increased to 1.2. Actual contract now worth $200,000 because I have the right to buy at $1 million and sell at 1.2. So if I exercise the right, bought the house at $1 million, technically, if I did that and go out to the real market, sell at 1.2, it's $20,000 minus it's $200,000 minus the $20,000 that I put down. So in reality, it'd be a $180,000 profit. Now, in the same way, the contract having now an innate value, if the stock started to go up while I own the call develops an innate value. And that innate value that the call develops is known in the options market as intrinsic value. It's the real value.